Hello everyone, welcome to the last video from the Northwest Mythology Volume 1 series. I hope you all enjoyed all these tales so far, and as we finish up with these last few stories, if you like what you heard, make sure to check out the website and pick up a copy of my book. And hit that thumbs up and subscribe button. I'll be starting on the content from Volume 2 in the coming weeks. This last video is one of my favorite topics. I'm going to take a look at why so many legends of dragons abound throughout so many different cultures. Even the Bible itself mentions dragons 21 times. But dragons also play an important role in Chinese and almost every other culture around the world. Are these just figurative language? Or do dragon spirits, are they real and can they occasionally manifest in our realm? Their physical bodies might be so hard for our minds to comprehend that our senses perceive them as storms or volcanic eruptions or other natural phenomena. And I'm going to look at undead creatures and why they arise at alarming rates across cultures. We've all heard of zombies, but there's far older tales of skeletons or farly decomposed bodies that can animate when certain conditions are met and some sort of event triggers them, either protecting their final resting spot or their valuable grave goods. And Washington lore features many of both these occurrences. Legends of dragons have been spread about the local mountains since the first people arrived in this land, and they continue to the present day. Farther, many locations where dead bodies were never recovered for one reason or the other are potentially said to be dangerous because the corpses can become animated and attack people. And we'll be looking at two locations that I find fascinating. The first location is a cave called Chinaman's Cave. And I know that's not politically correct, but I don't know another name for this cave. It's located in the Bluffs, which is an area between Port Angeles and Sequim. And there's two ways to potentially reach this cave. One's to start at Four Seasons Park and hike to the beach, and then hike about another 4 miles east along the beach, along the bluffs, these massive cliffs, for about 5 miles. But you have to be careful to start at low tide, because at high tide there's no beach to walk on. And many people need rescuing, or even some have drowned when the water comes in quicker than they expected and they get trapped. Those cliffs are about 100 feet to 200 feet high, so there's no climbing them. They're sheer cliffs. So the first mile of that way is private beaches, but usually people don't come out if you hike that way, but you should be prepared to get yelled at. The other way is to start at Dungeon S and then hike west along the beach. And this takes about 8 miles as far as my best calculation, but the tide is still a threat even if you go this way. So Chinaman's Cave got its name from several Chinese men who, legend has it, died there in the cave. So the exact number of the men that died is up for debate, but some sources have said as many as 10, while others say only 3. Some say they were camping above it when there was a cave-in and they died, and others said they were camping in it and the cave-in fell and trapped them. Either way, both those stories agree that several men of Chinese descent died and got buried in that cave. And the cave is about 50 feet high and extends about 250 feet back. And there's that 30-foot hole in the back of where that cave-in was said to have happened. The cave is made primarily from packed clay. So what the Chinese men were doing in the area is also up for debate. The consensus is that they were there in the late 1800s, early 1900s, working on the railroad tracks. And the line was supposed to connect the area to Seattle. And several hundred miles of tracks were built, as well as some massive wood bridges. And this would make a lot of sense, as many Chinese workers were known to have built the railroads during that time. But as what they were doing in that specific remote area is where the story split. So some locals say that they were trying to escape their indentured servitude to the strict railroad company. That they were migrant workers and they're kind of forced to work long and dangerous hours, and they wanted to quit, but they're forced to continue because they had signed contracts that they didn't even really understand. So others say they were in that cave because they're prospecting for gold on their off time. But still other stories claim that there was pirate treasure stashed away in some of these seaside caves, and they were looking for it on their off time. But whatever the truth is, the fact is that several Chinese men supposedly died there in that cave. But the legend doesn't end there. The story also agrees that the bodies were never retrieved. And then whether this was because of it was cost prohibitive or because of apathy, they just were buried right there in the rubble. Nobody ever went and retrieved them. And it's farther agreed upon that if the area is disturbed by people looking for gold or the pirate treasure, the corpses will animate and claw their way through the surface, and their skeletal frames are imbued with supernatural vigor once they reach the surface. And they'll emerge muddy in their traditional Chinese garb, now in tatters. A few scraps of worm-eaten flesh is said to still cling from their skulls. Many of the arisen hungry dead are still wearing their conical rice hats that they used to harvest rice, those round hats. And they have their pickaxes they'd use as makeshift weapons. And that's how they're able to identify that these men are Chinese, because of their hats and their garb, the witnesses that claim to have seen them. So in Scandinavian culture, we call these beings Drugar. And they're similar to zombies, but they usually protect treasure and have some semblance of intelligence left in them. They're not just dumb. And they're said to possess this supernatural strength and sometimes use weapons. And then their eye sockets glow. They're not just eyes, they glow with a supernatural light. And their goal is to kill or chase trespassers away from their resting spot. And Drugar are said to be created when they die in an area and their bodies aren't laid to rest in the appropriate way. And they're trying to protect their final resting spot or their grave goods. And they're extremely hard to kill or to put their souls at rest. It's not like a zombie that we think of on TV. They're extremely durable. As a kid growing up in the area, several people died either in that cave or trying to reach the cave. Or at least that was the official story, that they drowned or went missing. But I went there as a young kid several times, and I was smart enough to not get caught in the tide, so I find that story hard to believe. Rumor is that if you dig for that lost gold or treasure, that they will come back to life. These dead bodies will arise and attack you. That acts as a strong deterrent for people not wanting to go to that cave. And I'll attest that there is claw marks in the mud, several deep gouges that would appeared to be made from skeletal type fingers. They're skinny and really deep, and you can almost see the nail marks. So if you desire to check out this cave, make sure you start out during the low tide, and you have to move quickly. So also make sure not to dig in the cave for any of that lost treasure. And I'd also say to stay away from the cave during the night. I hope most people would have enough common sense to already know that this is a bad idea, but local teens have many stories of shining a flashlight from above into that cave, and they see ghostly figures stumbling about within. The cave is not well known, and I wonder if it is kept a secret on purpose because of the rumored vengeful dead that still may linger in their muddy, unmarked graves. It acts as a way to keep people away. So Washington's topography is reminiscent of Tolkien's Middle-earth setting. To the west, we have the Olympics. These mountains, when visible, are often shrouded in mist, and many people refer to the mountains locally as the Misty Mountains. So this can make hiking unpredictable, as the famous mist can quickly swoop in and spoil many sought-after views. And the next parallel is the giant, lonely mountain named Mount Rainier. I and many other residents like to call it by its original name, Mount Tahoma. This means Mother of Waters in the local Puyallup tribal language. Seeing this mountain looming on the horizon always brings parallels to my mind of the Lonely Mountain from the setting in The Hobbit. And in fact, it is often referred to here locally as the Lonely Mountain. It's so big that it appears to stand by itself. And to farther draw parallels to the Lonely Mountain, Mount Tahoma is said to be inhabited by a fire-breathing dragon. The clouds that gather at the top on sunny days are said to be formed from the slumbering dragon that lies deep beneath, and its fiery breath makes steam as it breathes and melts the snow, and it causes that those clouds that seem to constantly be up there. Whenever the mountain shakes, it's said to be from that massive beast moving around in its slumber. So stories of the mountain erupting were said to be the wrath of the dragon descending down on the countryside. And the smoke and fire clouds sweeping down the slopes were the dragon taking flight on its fiery wings. It would destroy everything in its path in an instant. The clouds of ash and steam were the massive breath being spewed from its enormous maw. These stories had even been corroborated when the first climbers attempted to reach the summit. The climbers happened upon some huge caverns that they thought were too round to be formed naturally. And so these early explorers reported that the tunnels had to have been dug by some sort of massive burrowing beast, just tunneling through the earth. And they also came across many geysers and volcanic activity that they thought could be caused by a sleeping unknown fiery beast. So hopefully we'll never see the fire dragon descending the slopes of Mount Rainier anytime soon. It could destroy anything in its path, and now millions of people live in the shadow of that lonely mountain. To see the fire dragon descending the slopes towards the sprawling metropolises would indeed be horrifying. Death and destruction would fly on that giant dragon's wings. Hopefully, early detection would allow some of those residents plenty of time to flee the hungry beast before it wreaks untold economic damage. But Washington lore is also filled with many other beliefs about fire dragons. The Solduck Hot Springs and Elwha Hot Springs are said to be caused by sleeping dragons as well. At one time, these dragons were said to be enemies, and they caused many huge gorges to be formed when they're fighting their battles there in between those two landmarks. In the 1980s, the Mount St. Helens eruption, many witnesses claimed that they saw a massive dark dragon-shaped figure wreathed in the smoke and ash of that eruption. And legends of sea dragons are also very common here. Between Indian Island and Marrowstone Island, one of these sea dragons was said to have slept. And it was awakened by drudging and construction in the 1970s. And it was said it got so angry at the destruction of its lair and habitat that it took off down the Hood Canal and sunk the floating Hood Canal bridge that was there. Witnesses reported seeing a massive ocean swell, and they said it looked like a giant creature swimming beneath the water, and it struck the bridge, and the structure instantly collapsed. And now this bridge was engineered to be able to withstand local weather patterns with ease, but it was quick work for this upset sea dragon. And no one knows what happened to the beast after this, but the area is also well known for shipwrecks. It's known as the graveyard of the Pacific. Hundreds of ships and thousands of lives have been lost around the Washington coast over the past 100 years. And many of the few survivors of these shipwrecks claim the last thing they saw was a massive sea swell heading towards their vessel. And they thought they saw a giant creature swimming in this sea swell towards their ship. Are these examples of pareidolia? This is where witnesses' minds try to make meaningful images of extraordinary natural events. It seems unlikely to me, as dragons are seen in eruptions, storms, and floods across the world and in different time periods. Feudal era farmers would have no knowledge of our imagery of fantasy dragons, but yet they still report the same things. Anything that is far-fetched is tossed aside as fantasy, but in all good fantasy there lies a kernel of truth. When native people first saw European ships, they described them as flying birds because they had no concept of what they were witnessing at that time. What if it's a similar thing with dragons? They're so hard for our minds to comprehend that we can only perceive them as these natural events. In conclusion, I do think there is a kernel of truth in some of these seemingly fantasy story tales. I wonder how much information and research the government has on these type of creatures and phenomenon. Are some places just left alone on purpose because of vengeful dead that still linger there? Does the government know about dragons and actively try to pass off dragon activity as natural calamities? Any witnesses that come forward are quickly called crackpots and told they're suffering from this pareidolia. seeing these random things in this natural events. If you enjoy what you heard, make sure you hit that thumbs up and subscribe. I'm trying to upload new videos of the strange and supernatural weekly. And if you want to support my storytelling, make sure you pick up a copy of one of my books from my website. They're available on Amazon or Barnes & Noble. And make sure you go to the website. I have a map on there where I link things that aren't stories, but they are interesting places around here in Washington. I love weird, strange, scary, and fantasy stories. And I look forward to sharing many more with you in the future. And I also often get asked, why don't I try to get some footage of these undead creatures or dragons? And I'm not sure that they can be captured with technology available to the general public. And even if I could capture them on film, I'd have to get dangerously close to do so. And even if the footage was obtained, it would be called fake. 100% I know people would be saying it was fake. And I love stories and I love adventure. And to me, evidence is secondary concern. For people that don't believe in this stuff, no evidence would ever be enough. So let me know what you think. Are there dragons sleeping in volcanoes and other places all over the world? Can the vengeful dead arise and hurt the living if their resting places are disturbed? Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video featuring tales from Volume 2.